Now we're going to continue on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. V'ibais Ema. The Gemara is offering a third answer to try to reconcile the machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim in the Seifa. Ibais Ema, perhaps the machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim in the case of Kasavur Ha'isi Shechachamim Matirim Li Mipnei Ha'ones Ani V'eni Yachol B'li Yayin Onus Ani. I'm in a situation of despair. I cannot go on without Yayin O Tuma. As we said before, the doctors prescribe that he drink wine, or he's a gravedigger by profession. And therefore, he says, this has nothing to do with the machlokas with regard to Rab Shimon Chachama and Mekabel Mixas HaYisurim, but rather be Nidrei Onsim Kamiflagi. We're going to go back to Masechet Nedarim, back on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, where the Gemara records a machlokas between Shmuel and Rav Asi regarding Nidrei Onsim, meaning when a person takes a neder and he cannot fulfill his neder because of an ones situation, as we'll see in a minute. And the machlokas between the Chacham and Rab Shimon really is identical with that machlokas there in Nedarim Chaf Aleph between Rav Asi and Shmuel. This now we learned in a Mishnah, and this Mishnah is in Masechet Nedarim Daf Chaf. There are four categories of Nedarim Hitiru Chachamim. And we're going to see a machlokas now between Shmuel and Rav Asi about what that means, Hitiru Chachamim. So we have on the list the following. Number one, Nidrei Zerizin, a person who takes a neder only to be Mizaris his friend. He wants to inspire his friend to do something, but he really has no intention and he has no desire for the neder to be chal. Number two, Nidrei Avoy. These are nedarim where a person makes a t'nai, and that kiyum t'nai is a guzma bialma. It's something that's just simply impossible. It's off the charts. Like, for example, the adam de mocher chayvetz chavero, the ein mocher hamocher vehalokech maskimim beineim al mechira chayvetz. So the mocher is trying to inspire and influence the lokeach to pay the price, and to be mizari's lokeach, to change his mind about the amount of money he's willing, the ceiling price he's willing to pay. He says, Konem alai tmei mekach im emkar es hachefetz v'pochos me'arba dinrim. And again, even though he literally, if we take him by his enunciations to his word, he took upon himself an Isur Karban on the Tmei Mekach that he wouldn't be nene from the Tmei Mekach, but this was only a ploy in order to get the Lokech to jack up the price that he was willing to pay. And number three, Nidrei Shkagos. Once again, we're talking about a person who takes a neder b'tnai, that something happened or will happen, and he forgot about that occurrence, and the neder turns out to be a shogeg. And finally, the fourth category, which is most relevant to our discussion here, is Nidrei Onsim, where he made the neder depend upon a t'nai, which he fulfilled ba'onis. He had no choice in the fulfillment of the t'nai of the neder. For example, the Gemara Nedarim Chav Gimel and Chav Daled, Adam shebikesh mechaver she'azmino l'suda imo. He was trying to implore his friend to invite him to a meal, and to be mechazek the hazmana, he asked the muzman, the one who was invited, asked the mazman, the one who was inviting the host, sheyidar neder, that if at the end he doesn't come to eat with him, then the mazman should prohibit all his nechasim on the muzman. And in such a case, these are Nidrei Onsim, because Basof, the reason why the Muzman couldn't show up at the Suda was only because he got sick, his son never took ill, he couldn't pass over the river, and so these mitigating circumstances of onus beyond his control made it impossible for him to come to the Seudah. And even though, according to the literal translation of the Tanai, the Neder is Bichal, the Neder is not Chal. And now we have machlokes between Rav Asi and Shmuel. Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Rav Asi. Arba, these four categories, Nedarim Alolu, are not automatically mutter, but rather tzrichim she'elu l'chachamim. There's a necessity to come in front of a chacham and be matir it. And this is the Shita Rav Asi. Now we have to keep in mind that what Rav Asi is talking about is a heter that will apply even without a Pesach and a Charata. In other words, even though the Chacham required him to go to a Chacham to achieve a heter, it's not a real bona fide Hataras Chacham. He doesn't need, according to the Ikar Adin, even according to Rav Asi, a Hataras Chacham in those four cases. But Kidei Shelo Yavo Lahakel, they shouldn't come to take Nedarim flippantly. Gam bin Nedarim Acherim is therefore they required of him to go to a Chacham as if to create a kind of a look like Hataras Chachamim. But you don't need, as we said before, to be posech beheter of a Pesach or a Charata. Ki Amri come to Shmuel Amrli, Tano Ketoni Hitiru Chacham Viad Amrit Tzrichin She'elu Chachamim. The Mishnah says that these four categories in the Nedarim, the Chachamim themselves were matir, which is implying that it's inherent in the Nedarim in these four categories, and then mutar me'aleim automatically then mutar. You don't have to go to a Chacham. How, Rav Asi, are you going to square away with the Mishnah? So Rav Asi holds that, as we said before, Hitiru Chachamim doesn't mean that the Chachamim automatically made them mutar me'aleim. We need a heter in front of the Chachamim. But when it says Hitiru Chacham, means they were matir even without a Pesach and a Charot. Now this machlokas, the debate between Rav Asi and Shmuel, the Gemara is identifying with the machlokas between Reb Shimon Chacham and our Mishnah. And the third din in our Mishnah, the third paragraph, is included under the category of Nidrei Onsim, because he accepted upon himself Nazirus, and he cannot observe Nazirus and abstain from drinking wine or entering into a cemetery, being mitami himself because of his onus. He cannot live without yayin, and because of his dochak parnasa, he is so desperate for his employment, for his wages, that he cannot give up kvuras ha-mason. That's his preoccupation, and therefore he never took the neder, knowing that he would have to abstain from wine or abstain from entering into a graveyard. I mean, that's almost suicidal for him. And therefore, the Rabbanan Sabri Kishmuel, the Rabbanan have embraced the sheet of Shmuel and Nidrei Onsim, that they are mutal legamrei, me'alem, there's no need for Sheilas Chacham. They're not binding, and Reb Shimon holds Rav Asi, that even Nidrei Onsim requires Sheilas Chacham, they're not mutar me'alem. And that's what happens in our Mishnah. If he wasn't shoel on his Nazirus to a Chacham, then Rav Asi says that the Nazirus will be Chal, and that's going to be the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. That's Rav Asi and Rabbi Shimon together, both holding that the Neder is Chal and it requires Hataras Chachamim, even though he's in a situation of onus, and that's Nidrei Onsim. There's a long discussion here, you should know, amongst the Tosfos of the Rosh and other Rishonim about the Gemara in Nedarim Chav Daled and Beis, that's talking about a case where he didn't know at the time of the neder that there would be an onus, and therefore Rav Asi might hold that it's very similar to a real bona fide neder, and it's a neder shegomar bedaito sheyochel nidro. Here we're talking about a case that he knew already b'shas haneder, when he took the Nazirus, that he won't be able to survive without wine, etc. And therefore was never gomer belibo bedaito. He never really had a full positive decision to take upon himself Nazirus, which would prohibit him from yayin, or in that case of tumas mes. So therefore it's difficult. According to Reb Shimon, why do we need she'ela on this neder? But perhaps we could say, and this is what the Rishonim investigate, that even in Mishnah, in our Mishnah, is talking about a case where at the time he took a neder, he was not onus. Later on, he was evaluated by a physician that at some point of his life he became physically dependent upon yayin. He became weaker subsequent to taking the neder, or he got a job as a gravedigger subsequent to taking the neder. And now we start in Mirz Hashem, the Mishnah here on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis, Hareini Nazir, person declares Hareini Nazir, and then he adds V'alai Ligaleach Nazir, which means that I'm accepting upon myself the karbanos of a Nazir. And this we have to understand that a Nazir, when he completes his Naziris, he has to bring a kivsa lechatos, a keves li'ol, an ayil l'shlomen. And this is all explicitly recorded in the Torah in Parshas Nasa. Now, the lashon of giluach in this particular Mishnah should be interpreted as referring to bringing karbanos, because giluach and karbanos are simultaneous at the time of the Gemara of his Nazirus. However, some interpret that the lashon giluach is a reference to Havos karbanos because the mitzvah of giluach can only be fulfilled after he brings his karbanos, and therefore when he declares Harei alai legalech nazir, what he meant by this legalech is I'll bring my karbanos of a nazir in order that I should be able to terminate my nazirus and I can take a haircut. Now let's emphasize the double language here. When he heard his friend who accepted upon himself Nazirus, he said, number one, Vani, and number two, Valai Legalech Nazir. So basically what we have here is two different Kabbalos. On the one hand, Vani means I will be a Nazir. And Memela, he's chayiv karbanos nazir when he terminates his nazir. So what did he add here when he said v'alai legaleach nazir? The answer is he pledged to bring the karbanos of another nazir on behalf of another nazir. So it's not enough that he brings his own karbanos when he completes his naziros, which again that was generated by a reini nazir. But in addition, when he adds v'alai legaleach nazir, means I will afford a nazir with the opportunity to do giluah because I'll bring his karbanos for him. So he now has accepted a double chiyuv. The Mishnah says that in this scenario, there could be a swap deal over him. How you pick him, if they want to listen to a very smart, wise recommendation, then they don't have to bring two sets of karbanos. All they have to bring is one karban. Pashut, one karban. How is that? I mean, one set of karban. How is that possible? Megalchim zeh. Each one will bring karbanos naziris for his friend. So each one was yotze because his friend brought karbanos for him. Plus, he fulfilled his obligation to bring karbanos for his friend. So that's a brilliant chap over here. Now again, even though when he completed his naziris, he didn't bring his own karbanos from his own bank account, he didn't pay for these karbanos. It was his friend who brought his karbanos on his behalf. Nevertheless, he fulfills his obligation, and this is derived by the Gemara in Tmura on Daf Yud from the pasuk in Parshas Naso, Karbanol Hashem Al Nizro Milvad Asher Tasig Yado, that the Nazir is chayev in karbanos based on whatever he can afford, L'fi Masechet Tasig Yado. And the karban nazir is the same, identical karban for both an ashir and an ani. And the Gemara explains that the Torah in this pasuk is talking about a scenario of an ani, and he doesn't have enough funds to be mafresh his own karbanos. So he has to be tasig yado al yidei achirim sheyitnu lo karbanos la krivam. The Gemara asks the following question: will vacillate about the following issue. a person, will call him Ruvain, declares Hareini Nazir, v'olai legalech Nazir. Shama Chavero, Shimon, his friend, heard him, v'omer va'ani, me too. He did not add the words v'olai legalech Nazir, legalech Nazir. Malu, what's the din? Vani akule dibura mashma, has the Shimon's declaration of Ani incorporates both the Reisha and the Seifa of Ruvain's statement, and therefore Shimon, now like Ruvain, is obligated not only to be Makabel Nazirus, Firtzach via Nazir, and then bring his own korbanos, but he also has to bring korbanos on behalf of another Nazir. O Dilma apalga dibura mashma. He only accepted one of the two halves of Ruvain's declaration of Hareini Nazir v'olai legalech Nizro Nazir. In Tzolom apalga dibura mashma reisho aseifa. If he's only accepting half of what Ruvain said, if Shimon, by saying Vani and omitting v'olai legalech Nazir, has indicated he only wants one half of the Kabbalah of Ruvain, then how do we interpret that half? Which half is it? Aresha means that he's accepting upon himself Hareini Nazir, so the Nazirus will be chal on him. Oh, a Seifa, perhaps it's going on the Seifa, which means v'olai legalech Nazir, which obligates Ruvain and now Shimon as well, according to this side, to bring korbanos of a Nazir on behalf of another Nazir. Toshma, let's be poshe this suffix based on the Mishnah. If a person says Hareini Nazir v'olai legalech Nazir, his friend heard him and added Vani ve'olai legalech Nazir. So only in this case does the Mishnah indicate that Shimon will have a double obligation. Number one, his own personal Nazirus. Number two, to bring korbanos on behalf of another Nazir. And all this is because of the double language that Shimon heard coming out of the mouth of Reuben, V'ani v'olai legalech Nazir. And then we saw in the Mishnah, Hayu pikchim megalchim zelz, as we discussed. But Mida Ka'amar, if we're medayik in the language of the Mishnah is very long-winded. Va'ani ve'olai, shmamina va'ani apalga de dibura. We see that the word Vani is only half of the dibur. Amri Ein, the Gemara says, yeah, that's true. We have a raya here that Vani means apalga dibura mashma, but miu, we're still left out in the dark, and we still have our suffix as to whether or not the Vani is going on the Reisha, meaning on accepting Hareini Nazir Nazirus, or Aseifa, where he says Olai legalech Nazir, and he's promising to bring karbanos on behalf of a Nazir. And the Gemara says, Mina, from the Mishnah itself, we midika Omar, v'olai legaleach, if he said olai legaleach, and then he it wasn't enough that he said Vani, he has to say also olai legaleach, shmamina Vani al tchilas dibura mashma. If you cut out the v'olai dibura, then he accepted upon himself Nazirus by saying Vani. It's his tantamount to have to say Nani Nazir, any Nazir. And that's the tchilas dibur mashma. But as far as being mischayev, an additional chiv to bring korbanos on behalf of another Nazir, for that he has to say v'olai legalech Nazir. Otherwise, he's not chayev in other korbanos. So it's a pretty stark raya from our Mishnah that it's al tchilas diburo mashma. Now here we have a note of significance. Ma raya me'ah Mishnah. What's the proof of the Mishnah? Remi kevon sha'omer gam va'ani v'gam v'olai legalech. Certainly, v'adai kavanoso b'amiras va'ani al tchilas adibur u'b'amiras v'olai legalech al sof adibur. That's clear. But we still have room for a suffix. What's going to be the din if he only says Vani? Maybe in this case, his kavana was on the second half of the dibur. But somehow the Gemara brings a raya from our Mishnah that it's dafka, if he says V'olai legalech, then he becomes chayev in the karbanos of a nazir. But if he says V'alai, and how much more so if he only says V'ani, then his kavanah is not to be makabel on himself Nazirus to bring karbonos with Nazir, but rather V'ani, I'm being makabel only that the Nazirus, as my friend said it in Tchilas Dvaro. And now we go on, and the Gemara refutes this right. Amalei Rav Huna Breid Rav Yeshua Rav Mimai Dahachi. How do you know it's like that? The Olam Emel Chai would tell you that Vani is Akule Dibura. That Vani is an all-inclusive acceptance of Ruvain's Dibur. So it means that he will be a Nazir, he will bring his karbanos. So Vani engenders a double chiyuv. The imishum valai, and if you'll say, wait a minute, the Mishnah is difficult because why did the Mishnah have to add v'alai legaleach, as we said before? And I'm going to be docha that. Shalo Omar came kedei l'schai v'karbonis nazir acher shal acher. L'may dekamar v'alai. What did he mean when he said v'alai legaleach? He meant to say b'ha milsa. In this dimension of bringing karbonos, he was kofil dvarov, and he said it a second time, and that's the derech b'nei adam lichvo l'shonam, to be give a chazara on what they said in the first lishna. So that's what he means v'olai. So therefore, you have no proof that v'ani is going back to tchilas dibur. Maybe v'ani goes on the entire dibur. And that which the Mishnah added that he said v'olai, that's what people usually do when they want to clarify and emphasize what they said. They repeat their statement, and that's the olai. Tilo temach, he says, Rav Huna, I'm going to prove this to you. To Katani, we learned in the Seif of a Mishnah, which we haven't gotten up to, it's on Yud Beis Amud Beis, that if a person declares Harei olai legaleh chatzi nazir, in other words, to bring to the Nazir half of his karbanos. Do you see that? He's being mischayev to help out his friend, but only chatzi Nazir. Chatzi karbanos. Shama chavero v'yomar v'ani olai legaleh chatzi Nazir. I also will bring for Nazir chatzi karbanos. And the din is now that he's chayev just like the Rishon was chayev. So here's the Gemara's kasha. Hasam. There in the Sefer Mika Tartin Mili are the two things that he was makabel on himself. Hello, Shom Gama Rishon lo kibel atzmo elachatzi karbanos nazirus. And nevertheless, Kofal Chaver v'yamar v'ani v'olat. So that wasn't necessary. What was his kavanah when he said olai? He means that he was makabel on himself to bring karbanos of a chatzi nazir, and he's just repeating his words. Is hachinami here too in the Reisha? Kika Omar v'olai v'ha milsa. In other words, in this dimension, he's makabel on himself to bring karbanos, and he's being kofil b'farshis dvaro. So now Rava is going to reject Rav Huna B'reid Rav Yishomalei Rava. Rava says to Rav Huna, Hachi Hashta, meaning, although you're right, maybe the Sefer was an Arichas Dvarim, the Tana added something which is lo l'tzorach, but that doesn't prove that even in the Reisha, he was marich for no purpose and for no point. Ki amrit bishlema reisha tzricha. That in the reisha he had to add v'olai, and that's going to be a proof that with the amira of vani he was makabel on himself only nazirus, which is what he said to his friend at the beginning of his dibur. But he's not being makabel on himself to bring the karban. That part he didn't accept. So again, the Reisha needs to explain that he added also the word V'olai, because only in that situation where he added the word V'olai is the Nazir's Chal, and on top of it, the ice cream, the whipped cream on top is that he's chayv to bring Karbonos B'Nazir on behalf of another Nazir. But Seifa, the last part of the Mishnah, Lo Tzricha. He didn't have to repeat himself. In other words, Shasheni Hosef Yomar V'olai, Afal Pichen, he didn't have to repeat what the Sheni said when he added the word Olai. The Afal Pichen Lo Koshem Adua Shona Atano Gam B'Seifa Shomar Hasheni Olai L'Galeh Chatzi Nazir. Tani Seifa to Lo Tzricha Mishum Reisha the Tzricha. Notice Agav the Reisha, where he needs to say it, because in that Lashon that's required, he can clinch the Kabbalah's Naziris. The Chiddush is in the Reisha. Ela Iyam, but if you're going to tell me that Reisha Lo Tzricha v'Seifa Lo Tzricha, in other words, when he says Va'ani, and he's chayav in all the dinim of the Rishon, is aim tzarch lahosav v'olai. He doesn't have to add the word v'olai. So now we have to raise the fine question: is Tani Reisha, and the next part of the Gemara is the Lo Tzricha, which means that. Let's read it again inside. He says, if you're going to say a Reisha Lo Tzricha, Seifa Lo Tzricha, because the Amira of Ani generates a chiyuv b'chol davar sharishon chayav. He's imitating, parroting the Rishon, and therefore he doesn't have to add the word v'olai. So why does it say Tani Reisha v'olai the Lo Tzricha? Why do you have to add the v'olai in the Reisha? The Tani also in the Seifa he says olai. It's all shalol tzricha. So this really ends the sugya here, and the Gemara ends with this proof that V'ani is going back only on Tchilas Divrei Chaveru, and therefore in the Reisha he had to add V'olai, and once he had to add V'olai in the Reisha, so Agav the Reisha, he adds that word in the Seif as well. This ends the sugya, and in Mitzvah Hashem, Daf Yud Beis is a brand new sugya. Take this opportunity to wish you all a wonderful, wonderful Shabbat, Shira, and we should be zocher to the ultimate Geula, Ken Yiratzon. Amen.